They're very interested in the topic and they want to hear from the speakers. Okay. And so again, yeah, after the forum, if everyone's okay with it, we can post it on YouTube. Okay, that sounds okay, Marie and Mark. Okay, all right. Okay, I'm gonna go first. We revised the speakers list, so I'm gonna go first. Just give a general introduction. Why we're doing this, and then who wants to go second? Marie, do you want to go second, or do you want to go third? Doesn't matter. How about you, Mark? You want to go second or third? Doesn't matter. Okay, I think maybe Mark wants to be third then. Right, he seems a little busy. Okay, so it'll be Joseph E, Dr. Marie Kim, and then Dr. Mark Ramseyer. Okay, we're gonna start in 1 minute. Okay, and by the way, I emailed my presentation to everybody, but if you didn't get my email, I'm gonna put it in chat mode. Where's chat mode? Chatting. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna share my. Oh, did I already share my screen? Yes. Okay. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. I'd like to welcome everybody to first to Hanyang University. I'm wearing my Hanyang University cap. Everybody can see, right? Okay, and my Hanyang University T-shirt. We're very proud of Hanyang. Better than the other H school, Harvard. What's that? Who knows about Harvard, right? Hanyang's better. We're the best. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, taking off my cap now. All right. So why? Okay. So welcome to our forum, and why are we talking about this? Why discuss colonial history, especially the comfort women issue? Because it's the main obstacle to cooperation between Korea and Japan and to a future Asian Union of democracies. In Europe, France and Germany share the same values and the same historical facts, and therefore they can negotiate the proper apology and compensation and form the European Union. So by agreeing on the past, they can agree on a future together. But Korea and Japan, they do not agree on the past, and therefore they cannot move together in the future. And so, for example, Japan is one, and so Korea has free trade agreements with every other country, including China, but not Japan. Okay. And so, for example, the 2015 agreement where the Japanese government offered 100 million won and an apology to each comfort woman, the next president in Korea said that we cannot accept it. It's not enough. Okay. And number two, the reason why we discuss comfort women issue is because it's a major challenge to academic freedom in Korea and among Korean studies professors. Okay. Now, what are these diverging facts and values? For those who are new to this debate, so the dominant facts in Korea and Western media is that the comfort woman is equivalent to sexual slavery, equivalent to the Holocaust. And so one of my students wrote back in 2018, there's little doubt that most comfort women were indeed underage girls, 11 and 12 years old. and who were serving up to 40 to 50 men daily. And in the 2016 movie Spirit's Homecoming, the movie advertises 200,000 comfort women, only 238 came back. This is a survival rate that is much worse than the Holocaust. Okay. Now, and the values is that, we are victim-centered. We focus on the victims. We should not challenge the testimonies of the victims. Okay. Now, for Japan, the official facts is they argue that, well, things like forceful taking away cannot be verified in any document. And so since we lack sufficient evidence, we should let scholars research this freely. Okay, so that is their claim. And then in Japan, you have revisionist scholars who freely argue that that the true number of comfort women is 20 to 80,000, and most join because of poverty. Okay, and so you have these diverging facts and values between Korea and Japan, which undermine cooperation. And number two, it leads to the formal and informal punishment of scholars for false harmful speech. And so in 2017, Suncheon Professor Song said that some women probably volunteered. He was fired and sentenced to 6 months in prison. In 2013, Sejong University Professor Park Yu-ha published a book, Comfort Women of the Empire, which said that some women volunteer, share camaraderie relations with soldiers. She was sued for criminal defamation. A Seoul appeals court fined her 10 million won for saying that her book emotionally harmed comfort women and was clearly false, in light of the UN Kumaraswamy report. Okay. Prosecutors appealed again to the Supreme Court, demanding a 3-year prison sentence. Finally, Yonsei Professor Yu Seok-chun, where Professor, oh, sorry, it should be Yu Seok-chun. Okay. Prosecutors argued that Liu's lecture in 2019 defamed former Korean comfort women. And then number two, defamed the Korean Council by claiming that they coached former comfort women. And three, defamed the Korean Council for claiming that senior members were members of the Unified Progressive Party. Okay. According to Kenji Yoshida, one of our reporters, he reports that prosecutors have consistently prolonged the case because they still haven't found evidence to convict. So for example, Han Kyung-hee could not specify individuals when asked to, so he could not find evidence that any women were actually kidnapped by the Japanese military. Instead, Han stated that what matters is not whether the Japanese military abducted women, but that the comfort women system existed during a period of forced colonization. Okay, now part 3 is that, why is this important for Heterodox Academy? It talks about the larger tension between free speech versus harmful speech. And so J.S. Mills argues that this false information does not endanger democracy or rational public deliberation because other people can counter you with correct information. And so for the most part, empirically or morally flawed speech should be constrained by public opinion, not government censorship. And free speech was something that historically, democracy activists strongly supported. Kim Dae-jung wrote, freedom of speech in Confucian Korea was highly valued based on the understanding that the nation's fate depended on it. And so since Confucian Korea, scholars have always fought for free speech. And in the past, when authoritarian governments imprisoned people for being allegedly communist, democracy activists fought back for free speech, such as Lee Seok-gi back in 2014. But since then, progressives, instead of fighting for free speech, now there's a trend to restrict harmful speech. And so 73 human rights groups lobbied a Korean court to fine 2 Korean men 1 million won for speaking on ethnic slur, hey coronavirus. So for saying that one statement, he was fined 1 million won. In 2023, the South Korean courts sentenced Ji-man-won for 2 years, for arguing that North Korean agents were involved in the Gwangju uprising. Okay, and just last year, 26 scholars of Korean studies have called for boycotting Disney Plus's Snowdrop for its fictional portrayal of a North Korean spy during Korea's democracy protests. And they argue that this drama justifies that people arrested, tortured, and even killed as suspected communists or spies. And so this drama justifies authoritarian wrongdoing. And so this open letter assumes that any portrayal of North Korean agents justifies the human rights violations of the Park Chung-hee and Chun Doo-hwan regimes. It lacks a nuanced perspective that right-wing regimes exaggerated communist or DPRK influence, but that such influence did exist, and that scholars can empirically assess this influence. But few scholars actually do. I don't know any historian who's actually researching the presence of North Korean agents, just because it's such a taboo topic. And they're afraid that if I research this topic, especially anything related to the Gwangju uprising, maybe I'll go to prison for 2 years. Okay. Now, part 4, this also illustrates a larger tension in scholarship between, as a scholar, am I oriented to science, truth and understanding, or am I oriented to social justice? And so to prepare for this forum, I contacted many scholars, many young scholars, and some of them were very interested in dialoguing with controversial professors. I'd like to ask the speakers and the audience members to consider these potential questions. 1, what are the best estimates for the number of Korean comfort women and how many survive? Is it like what the movie said, 0.1%, or do you think, or do you think more? Number 2, was any woman from Korea and Taiwan abducted directly by the Japanese military? Did some women receive larger advance payments during wartime? And were they allowed to leave after their contracts would expire? Did most women? Okay. Did some members of the Korean Council pressure and manipulate women's testimonies? To what extent was the military hierarchy aware and complicit in the deceptive practices of private brokers and corrupt officials? And how does the Japanese comfort women system compare to the system for US soldiers in South Korea and Korean soldiers during the Vietnam War? And finally, how do controversial scholars or defenders of their academic freedom, why do they think that way? What are the implications? Is it Japanese money? Is it politics, or is it something else? And what are the implications? There seems to be an assumption that if Ramseyer is right, the victims have less claim to victimhood, whether the woman volunteered or not. Our society needs them to remain pure. If not, people think they cannot hold Japan responsible. Is that true? Okay. Finally, are some scholars criticized more than others because of their race, gender, and politics? In other words, our scholars like, Park Yu-ha, Sarah So, they're women, they're Korean, they're feminists. So they're considered good. On the other hand, other scholars, they're white, they're men, they're politically conservative, and so they're more suspect. What is the role of race, gender, and political orientation in this debate? Okay. Now, I recommend my students and also my audience members to, if you don't know about this debate, please read, especially the best books in this field, such as Sarah So. And so her book finds or argues that the wages of comfort women were generally much greater. And a more complex view of comfort women beyond victim stereotypes leads to greater empathy and understanding of the women's unique individual experiences. And so her argument is that we need to humanize these women, not just fit them into a victim stereotype. And 3, scholars should report the complexity of history instead of selective and uncritical observations. And finally, both Sarah So and Park Yu-ha argue for evidence-based reconciliation, shared facts, between South Korea and Japan. And then as for their supposed defenders, such as Professor Yi, that I want scholars to debate controversial scholars and to explain why his or her core claims are empirically wrong. For instance, do you have evidence that women receive less generous or simply no contracts or simply no money during wartime than in peacetime? So let's argue based on logical arguments and facts. Okay. Thank you for listening and participating. We welcome civil dialogue from all perspectives. Okay, now, thank you. Does anyone have any quick questions or comments for the first speaker? That's me, before we move on to the second speaker. I'm gonna stop sharing now. Okay, so let's open it up. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Okay, I seeing none. No comments, right? Okay. Oh, is there somebody chatting? Okay. Okay. So Paul wrote a long comment. Thank you. All right. Okay. Now, if there's no other question or comment, then let's go to our second speaker. Dr. Marie Kim, are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Sure. Go ahead, Marie.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. I think, Joseph, you put it really right. You are right on the point, saying that this comfort women issue really requires a little bit more complicated understanding than has been viewed so far. Now, in my talk, I'm going to just briefly summarize the cases of Park Yoo-ah. Now, Joseph already outlined it, and then talk about this comfort women question. Now, Park Yoo-ah's troubles began right after her book came out in 2013, and the civil suit is still going on. Now, she was found liable. So now she was ordered to pay each plaintiff, there were 9 of them. So each plaintiff 10 million won. Now, that was a civil suit. And then in a criminal suit, as Joseph said, she was acquitted by the district court, but then it was reversed, and then Park was found guilty and was fined. So that was in October 2017, the appeals court conviction. And then a case was appealed. It was sitting at the Supreme Court, well, for now, more than 5 years. So it's fast approaching 6 years. So why? That's a good question. And Professor Liu Seok-chun was prosecuted in November 2020. Now, in these cases, I think I want to point out 2 legal issues. Now, defamation, now criminal law, criminal case of defamation in Korea. Now, the question is whether these comfort women whom Park Yoo-ah referred to in a book and Liu Seok-chun talked about in his classroom lecture. Now, whether the comfort women were really specific enough to defame these 9 individual plaintiffs. Well, the question is, I mean, in any legal case, in any defamation case, we gotta ask whether there was really a infringement of the legally protected interest of a right. Now, in Park's book, she did not name any names. No names were named, and her book, as we all know, just dealt with the history of the Korean comfort women as a whole, as a scholarly subject. So there was really no possibility that the book would really damage the legally protected reputation of the specific individual plaintiffs. So it seems like this fact that the court found her guilty anyway really shows a sort of tendency in Korea of equating this comfort women issue with sort of national issue. That is, it is the same as the injury for the entire Korean women or entire Korean people. So this is an issue of a representation of a sort of a collective national memory. And following this logic, the court basically said that writing about, the scholarly writing about the history of comfort women could be interpreted or construed as criminally defaming specific individuals. Now, the second legal issue is a substantive issue here, is whether Park Yoo-ha's book included false statement. The defamation is a crime against the statement of fact, not just against the opinion. So now that involves now the comfort women issue. Now, Professor Ryu Seok-chun's lecture, I read in the newspapers, he said in the classroom that most Korean women ended up in the comfort station because they and their family were poor. They needed the money. So they were more likely the victims of poverty and fraudulent recruitment rather than the victims of the military kidnapping, that the Korean girls were snatched away in broad daylight and put in the back of the military truck and so forth. So here now I would like to kind of mention briefly about the recent scholarly trend in Japan, historiography in Japan on the comfort women issue. Now, recent studies, I'm talking about this mainstream historiography. Now, this recent studies place more emphasis on gender discrimination and class discrimination, and less on this military violence or the ethnic discrimination. Now, we all know that previously, when the comfort women issue really became a hot international topic in 1990s and early 2000, the comfort women issue or comfort women system was really understood as a military sexual slavery. So the main focus was on the Japan's military, Japan's war of aggression, or the crime committed by the military. But more and more scholars now, in a sort of, you may call it the sort of a paradigm shift, tend to link this wartime comfort stations to Japan's pre-war state-regulated sex industry, the licensed prostitution, which has a long history in Japan. Now, Japan's licensed prostitution was basically a debt slavery. Legally, it was a legal practice, perfectly legal, in which the parents borrowed the money and placed their daughters as collaterals. And these daughters were then sold to brothels and then resold and stuck in this prostitution. Now, that was in Japan. Now, what about in Korea? Now, first, I would like to stress that it is difficult to draw a kind of neat, direct line between the comfort women and prostitution, as in Japan. Again, Japan has this long history of a public prostitution. But in Korea, public prostitution was introduced to Korea in 1916 by an ordinance of colonial government. So there was no really tradition of this public prostitution as in Japan. So the main difference is, now in Japan, this fraudulent recruitment of comfort women by private agent was prohibited and tightly regulated, but not so much in Korea. So here there is really the question of a uniqueness of a colonial situation. So it seems there are commonalities and also differences between Japan and Korea regarding this comfort women issue. In Korea, now first the commonality is, similarity is, both in Korea and in Japan, this sort of structural coercion of poverty and patriarchy was a serious problem. And then the difference was that in Korea, there was much more rampant kidnapping and much less effective regulation by the authorities. Now, kidnapping for profit was a crime. It was in Meiji Criminal Code, Article 225 and 226. And in Korea, colonial court, there are several, about 10 colonial court cases, records of dealing with the kidnapping for profit. Now, when you look at the colonial situation in Korea, there was some very unique development here. Now, from about the 1920s, many girls were given away by the parents to brokers under the arrangement of the so-called foster daughters or adoptive daughters. Now in Korean, it's called a 수양녀. Now, who were then sold to entertainment sector to become a 기생, for example, and many of them ended up in Manchuria. And if you look at the contemporary newspapers, 1920s, 1930s, now newspapers are full of these stories of criminals and very heartbreaking stories of women, of the victims here. So the point is, now cultural factor, social factor, and economic factors in colonial society, in very dismal colonial society, must be taken into consideration in trying to explain what really happened in Korea. Now, in Japan as well as in Korea, it seems that we need to give attention to the possibility of violence against their own women. And it seems that may require as much attention as a historical issue as the operation of the comfort stations. So there was no doubt that the colonial subjects got short shrift, really, because colonial police, colonial authorities did not and could not crack down effectively these fraudulent recruiters. And there were plenty of them, plenty of ne'er-do-wells. Then why couldn't the police or didn't police crack down on them as effectively as in Japan? Well, obviously, limited administrative power was one reason. And another reason is, well, in general, colonial authorities were very reluctant to meddle in Korean practices, Korean customs, such as, well, giving up girls as foster daughters. And say when the police, for example, caught a kidnapper, this fraudulent recruiters, the police still would not rescue and free the victims from kidnappers as long as it could be shown that she was bound by a legally executed debt, because that was the controlling law, controlling jurisprudence of the Japanese court, the Daishin, the highest court. Now, I will just briefly mention this issue of now Article 90 of the Civil Code, Meiji Code. A key issue was whether there's a prostitution contract were against the Meiji Civil Code, Article 90. Article 90 says, quote, a legal act, a juristic act, with a purpose contrary to public order or good morals is void. So many scholars, contemporary scholars, said, well, prostitution contracts are clearly against the public order and good morals. However, the highest court of Japan in the famous case in 1902 ruled, well, as long as the profession of this licensed prostitute is publicly recognized, well, one should be allowed to repay the debt in whatever means of her own choice. And well, prostitution is just one of the choices open to her. Now we see that Major Civil Code 1896 was a very liberal, if you will, the code. It placed heavy emphasis on individual freedom. So this kind of interpretation by the court of Article 90 is one example. So here we see that under the legal interpretation and under the public prostitution system, the crime of kidnapping could metamorphose into a civil law case of a debtor and creditor the situation. And again, the comfort women system proceeded or unfolded in Japan and Korea in both a similar and different manner. Now, similarity was that it was a result of economic coercion, poverty. But colonial women did not receive as much protection as women in the metropole. And that was a real tragedy of the colonial Korea. Now, among scholars, the main objection to linking comfort women and the prostitution together is that it allegedly exculpate the Japanese empire or the Japanese military. But as far as I know, no reasonable scholar, no respectable scholar would argue that Japan is not responsible simply because the prostitution was legal. So the point is, now sexual slavery and debt slavery, or the prostitution system, really need not be mutually exclusive. They could be seen together, and we should pay attention to both in an equal manner. So it seems like the current debate going on comfort women issue would benefit from a sort of a little bit of reconfiguration, if you will, or recalibration, so that the scholars would talk to each other, would get in a dialogue. And it doesn't matter whether any specific scholar subscribes to a feminist paradigm or the nationalist paradigm. It does not matter, but just a dialogue between the scholars would at least spare them from trying to disprove that no one defends. I mean, that would be quite a waste if you just pay all your attention, waste all your energy to disprove the arguments that no one argues. Now I come back to Park Yua's the case here. What Professor Park asked and Professor Liu asked in his classroom was this: whether this so-called physical coercion by the imperial army, like a dragoning by force, would have been the most effective means of mobilizing comfort women. No one denies the existence of a comfort station. No one denies that they were supervised and so forth, military, by the military and so forth. But the question that I'm asking is a little bit different here. Now, were in Korea the colonial authorities really capable of say, supervising, then there's a forcible recruitment, the forcible mobilization of Korean girls. Were they capable of doing that? Or were they even willing to do that? Were they willing to take such a risk? Or did they really need to do that? Now, I think these are important historical questions that deserve attention. Now, Professor Bach and you were accused of denying history. Now, Joseph referred to this, but then you have to ask, who owns history? Well, I find it, as a historian, I find it a little bit kind of disheartening, unfortunate, as I think it is dangerous to think that there's only one version of history when there is yet little documentary evidence. History cannot exist without fact. History cannot exist without evidence. And as Joseph said, some liken this comfort women issue to Holocaust denial laws, the Holocaust and also this May 18 law to Holocaust denial law. Well, I think it cheapens the Holocaust. And again, as a historian, I hope that we try to avoid such a kind of arrogant attitude, arrogance or ignorance, I mean, for that matter, to say there is only one version of history and only one story is real and nothing else. Because, well, I mean, there is an old maxim, and isn't it that we say that we must understand the past as on its own terms, because history is more than the moral rhetoric here. So to sum up, for comfort women issue, I believe scholars should bring their opposing views into dialogue instead of just talking past one another, which unfortunately seems to be the case. Well, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, let's give her a round of applause. Thank you very much, Marie. Okay, for that very detailed presentation. I'd like to encourage everyone to, if you're able, to turn on your video, audio off, so we can all see each other's faces, make it more interactive and dialogue. And also, last year, we had a couple of people who watched us anonymously. If you're watching us anonymously, you're also welcome. So David, if you're out there, hello. Okay, so we welcome everybody to participate, whatever your views are. Okay, Mark, do you want to say something or do you want to just answer questions?
No, sure. I mean, I will say a few things. I think there are way too many things going on. You know, we could have a discussion about licensed prostitution in Japan and under what circumstances women could quit. We could have a discussion about the extent to which the Japanese army did or did not successfully check when women applied to go abroad, whether they were deceived or not. We could have a discussion about the extent to which the advance payment went to the parents and the extent to which it went to the woman. If you're recruiting somebody to go work at a brothel halfway across Asia in a, you know, next to some godforsaken military base, and the recruiter says, oh yeah, we'll pay you every week. You know, a lot of women will say, how do I know you're going to pay me? And if you don't pay me, then what am I going to do? And so, of course, the recruiter says, look, you will work no more than 2 years, and you will make at least this much. And I'll make sure that my promise to pay you is credible by paying you up front. Okay, this isn't debt slavery. This is paying people in advance because the ability to collect after the fact is that much harder. I mean, we could have discussions on all these things, but let me focus instead on the preliminary point, which is I work at a research university. The largest universities and the best in most countries are what are called research universities. You cannot have a research university if some conclusions are regarded as unacceptable before the fact. What it means to come and study at a research university as a student is, if it's a good research university, you're going to be offended. You'll be offended a lot. You'll be offended by your profs. You'll be offended by other students. And if you don't want this, that's fine. You don't have to go to a research university. I can't tell you anything about the universities and colleges in Korea because I don't know them. I can about Japan and the United States. And in the United States, we have a long tradition of having small colleges. These small colleges are not research universities. And some of them try to keep an atmosphere similar to a research university where students encounter all kinds of ideas, many of which they find offensive. Other places take a more protective attitude and they say, look, you come here, we're only going to allow certain kinds of discussions. And students choose and faculty choose. And it seems to me that doesn't bother me as much. I wouldn't want to teach at a school like that. But some people don't mind it, and so be it. I teach at a research university, and you simply cannot have a research university if you have some conclusions that are deemed off base. We have discussions in faculty meetings sometimes, and some faculty will say, well, yeah, no, of course we should have freedom of speech, but of course, we wouldn't allow Holocaust denial. Or they'll say, well, of course, but we wouldn't allow racism. I mean, we don't hire racists, so we wouldn't want to allow professors to engage, to say racist things. Or they'll say, well, of course, but we allow any sort of research, but of course we don't allow fraud. Why would we allow fraudulent research? Well, what this does, and this is my experience, is it gives people who want to censor a template. If we don't allow Holocaust denial, then they say, well, Ramseyer talking about comfort women the way that you do is analogous to Holocaust denial, and so it should be banned. They'll say, Ramseyer, this is an anti-Korean prejudice. That's like racism. We don't allow racism. You're a white supremacist, and so we're going to ban you. Or they'll say, we don't allow fraud. And so they will come up with, as far as I'm concerned, preposterously dishonest attacks, claiming it's fraudulent. So, I mean, it seems to me it has to be that anything is allowed. If you don't like what somebody says, you write an article opposed to it. You debate it. And that's what journals are for. You don't shut them down in advance. A research university can't work if things are banned in advance. And if you're going to have research universities open, then you can't have criminal sanctions either. It just seems to me criminal sanctions for speech should just be flatly disallowed. There shouldn't be any. As far as I'm concerned, Holocaust denial should not be a crime. And in the United States, it isn't a crime. It's famously a crime in Germany, and so be it. But it's not a crime in the US, and I wouldn't want it to be a crime. We don't want to go down that road. There's been talk about defamation. Well, look, clearly it seems to me in the Korean discussions about defamation of comfort women, the basic legal principles of defamation, I mean, that's true. I don't know Korean law of defamation, but I would guess it's the same. First, you have to say that somebody said something dishonest about you. Well, if you're an elderly woman, you have to be able to show first that you were a comfort woman. Secondly, you have to show that you, in fact, were recruited one way rather than another way. And you better do this more likely than not. And proving this kind of stuff 60, 70 years after the fact is pretty impossible. so they lose. And that's just the way it is. That's what statute of limitations are. Courts can't make decisions about what happened 60, 70 years after the fact, and they shouldn't be trying to. One last point about this, which goes to the basic psychology of this, which is that it's not true that people get really offended when something that they hold dear is attacked. That's not when people really get offended. People really get upset when somebody contests something which they very desperately want to be true, but at some level suspect that it's not. You know, I think that applies to the whole comfort women debate as well. So we could talk about you know, the specifics of comfort women, but I think at this point I would just leave my comments at this level of generality.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mark Ramseyer. Okay, great. All right. Now I got an email from Julie Tang, chairwoman of the Comfort Women Association. Julie, are you still there? Do you need a few minutes to get ready, or are you ready? Are you ready for your comment or question now? Oh, can I hear you? Yes, and please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yes, I am Julie Tang. I am a co-chair of the Comfort Women Justice Coalition. I wanted to hear what people are saying. And I've only heard two speakers, and I'm glad I did, because I'm just shocked at the level of revisionism that is going on, especially hearing what Professor Ramseyer is saying. He made up so many things and lies and come up with a theory that has been totally debunked by a very respectable community. And hearing how he lightheartedly talked about issues that are very deep and very dear to the community of people that I work with, I'm just glad that I see him for who he is. Now, I'm also appreciative of some of the historical context that Marie talked about in terms of Japan and Korea's culture and customs on the legitimization of sexual enslavement of women and girls. They were unacceptable then and unacceptable now, and definitely not to be an excuse for Japan's comfort women system, and the least of which is to allow us to look at comfort women system as simply a cold-hearted historical fact, which you now call a scholarly approach or scholarly endeavor, which in fact fits into a very political economic agenda of today's geopolitics. The question that I wanted to raise is that, Professor Yi, you mentioned in your webinar's introduction that this discussion that we're having is to remove the main obstacle to Korea-Japan cooperation and to future Asian Union of democracies. I wanted to ask, what kind of cooperation are you referring to? And why is it so urgent now that you're calling for this kind of discussion, which I think that you're not going to find anybody who really don't believe there was atrocities committed by the Japanese military during World War II, very serious atrocities committed against women and girls, and the serious sexual enslavement. Also, in your discussions, you never talked about comfort women in the rest of the 14 Asian countries that Japan invaded during World War II. Among them, China, Philippines, East Timor, Dutch Indies, where there are still living victims who have been telling the world about their abduction, torture, and systematic rapes as comfort women by the Japanese soldiers. The comfort women's oral history has been corroborated by independent information existing at the time that the events happened, but people, including the so-called scholars here, led by Ramseyer, refused to face history squarely. This kind of revisionism is mirrored in denialism and is dangerous and destructive to women and the progress that they have made to be free from sexual slavery and exploitation by men. So the question that I have, what is this urgency right now to deal with this issue? And why is the Japan-Korea cooperation so important to create a controversy of this conflict women issue, which has been pretty much, in my mind, established by the facts, by recipient witness accounts, and numerous scholastic articles and research. So what is the urgency right now for the Korea-Japan cooperation?
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tang. And then I wanted to give Tang maybe some applause for participating and offering different perspectives. Thank you. And then Ms. Tang, you're welcome to use a Zoom chat to, for people who want to get more information, you can share links to your organization. And then I encourage everybody to, learn from each other. You asked me.
Professor Yi, are you going to answer my question?
Yes. So I'm answering that right now. So I'm thinking of my answer. I think one reason is that, you're talking about the comfort women activities in other countries. And I agree, those are all very important. What happened in China, Indonesia, Philippines. And I think if you read Sarah So's Comfort Women book, she does mention all those other countries as well. And so I do encourage the audience members to read the best scholarship on this issue. As for me, like I am based here in Korea, so I know the issue of Korean comfort women the most. So I feel more comfortable talking about an issue that I have more knowledge of than comfort women in other contexts. That's number one. But please let me finish. But I do encourage, future forums where we can discuss, comfort women, the system in other countries. And if Julie or anybody else wants to organize such a forum, I'm happy to advertise among my members. That's number one. And number two is your second question was about reconciliation. Again, as a Korea-based scholar, I encourage South Korea I encourage more dialogue and reconciliation between South Korea and all our neighbors. And so I have written and also organized forums about how South Korea can better cooperate with China, North Korea, and Japan, among others. And one of the things that I stress is that, again, you need shared facts. And so, for example, in the past, I have taught students who were raised in North Korea, and all my North Korean students mentioned the Sinchon massacre. All North Korean elementary students attend the Sinchon Massacre Museum, where they learn about how U.S. troops, they entered the town of Sinchon and massacred 25,000 people. And so every elementary student learns this. This is like their Nanjing massacre. On the other hand, U.S. scholars, even progressive scholars such as University of Chicago's Bruce Cummings says, yes, U.S. soldiers did enter Sinchon, but the killings was probably not Americans killing Koreans. It was actually Koreans killing other Koreans. Specifically, it was Korean Christians killing Korean communists in revenge for Korean communists killing Christians earlier. And so what I find is that in North Korean side, American historians have very different facts about what actually happened. And because of those different facts, I see a lot of emotional distance between the US and North Korean side. And I think that only through dialogue and share facts can we truly reconcile between different countries, whether it's North Korea, South Korea, United States, or between South Korea and Japan. But Julie, don't you agree that one of the obstacles is that like the Japanese and Korean governments, Japanese and Korean publics, they hold to fundamentally different facts about what happened in the past. And if they can come to, and so that's question number one. And question number two is that if they can come to a certain consensus on what happened in the past, then we can better come to a consensus on what is apology and compensation that is required.
Well, I've heard many criminal trials in my lifetime. I am a retired judge of the San Francisco Superior Court. And I hear evidence, I hear witnesses. There's no way there are times that parties can agree on everything, especially on their heinous crimes that have been committed. There's always somebody who committed the murder, and the murderer is saying that I didn't commit the crime. Well, look at Germany. The way to reach complete reconciliation is for the perpetrator to honestly admit and own up to the crime that it has committed. And in this instance, Japan needs to move for an apology and all the reparations that they are required to do so. All the apologies that have been allegedly made don't hold any beans. And I'm not going to go into that now. And I'm not here to talk about those issues. But the victim community do not recognize those apologies. They are illegal. They are not even recognized by the victims themselves. So how can an apology be accepted? How can there be reconciliation? But I want to share with you, Professor Yi, since you're so open about everything. The way I'm seeing this whole forum here, okay, and the way it is constructed, it seems to me that it is not a coincidence that all these talks are timed with the changing US-China relationships. And in recent years, US politicians have been threatening to go to war with China, and in fact are preparing to do so. Japan is often identified with US think tanks such as Center for Strategic and International Studies, Center for New American Security, as the lead country in a proxy war against China, if there were to be such a war. But before it can enter and start another war in Asia, Japan needs to come out of its dark history of World War II, which is the biggest obstacle is the conflict women issue, which currently serve as a moral reminder of Japan's military in World War II, having committed the most horrible war crimes against women. So now they are blaming the conflict women themselves for their rape and enslavement by the Japanese military. It's all about Japan going to war again. So would it repeat its war atrocities, especially those committed against women? Well, George Santayana said, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And that's what I think is going on right now. Okay, so I'm trying to answer the question for you. By the way, according to the San Francisco Chronicle poll that came out 2 weeks ago, in which San Francisco residents are asked to pick their most favorite memorials. Guess who are the most favorite? The San Francisco Comfort Women Memorial that we built and we meaning the Comfort Women Justice Coalition, that we built in 2017 over the strenuous objection from the Japanese government, and is now among the top 5 most favorite memorials out of 98 memorials in San Francisco. We were the newest, and already we're among the 5 most favorite by San Francisco residents. And I'm telling you, these are the issues that we are concentrated on, not figuring out what game theory is responsible for the Comfort Women institution, and how much are these women being paid. These are ridiculous assertions without any primary sources. And they are just garnered by documents here and there. They are unacceptable in any court of law and cannot hold up any kind of cases. Anyway, I'm sorry I go into a tangent. I didn't mean to go into all of that, but thank you, Professor Yi, for giving me the opportunity to share these with all of you.
You're very welcome, Ms. Tang, or Justice Chang. And just to let you know,
I'm a judge.
Oh, sure.
I was a judge, retired judge.
Okay, sure. And then I do agree with your point about comfort women statues, and I published essays in Japanese newspapers saying we should respect, not vandalize comfort women statues, again, to promote more peaceful dialogue. And number 2, I've also published essays saying U.S. should not censor, Chinese businesses such as TikTok. So I do support your call for more freedom. Now,
I'm not calling for freedom. I'm calling for peace. Peace in Asia. And that's what I'm calling for. And I'm very worried about Japan's adding the defense budget and also buying missiles, the Tomahawks pointed at China. What are we doing there? What are we doing in Asia? Why are we creating a war? And what is Japan's central role in this geopolitical issue in Asia?
I understand. Thank you. You're welcome to write additional comments on the chat box, but I see a few more hands, especially including from my students. Mark and Marie, can I go to other questions, or is there something that you want to say quickly? Can we go to other questions? Okay. All right. So I see. Okay. So please raise your hand if you have a question or comment, or yell at me. Okay. Did you have a question or comment? Okay, go ahead. Okay. So one of my Korean students has a question or comment, and please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Park from Hanyang University Graduate School. Thank you for a wonderful Zoom meeting today. Actually, I have a question to Professor Mark Ramseyer, who I am a person who sent you an appreciation email. Actually, me and my family inspired by your wonderful research, and I appreciate. First, I know you had a very hard time, and I want to express deep apology about South Korean radical left wings disrespected you and your research. Professor, I want to ask you about future roadmap of comfort women research, and I want to ask you about the way of good future relationships between South Korea and Japan. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Park. Mark, do you want to answer? Do you want to respond to any of that? What is the future of South Korea-Japan relations?
I mean, thank you very much for your very kind words. I don't apologize for what the American government does, so you certainly shouldn't feel like you're called on to apologize for anything. I just appreciate your very kind words. I hope that people continue to do research, and I hope that they do research with no holds barred. I hope that that if scholars are allowed to read the documents that they can find, interview the people that they interview, and weigh evidence and make reasonable inferences from them, that I hope eventually we can figure this one out. You know, famous schools like Harvard, and I suspect Seoul National probably, and certainly University of Tokyo, they have professors who we call public intellectuals, and they're people who have an audience that goes much broader. And sometimes I do try to reach a broader audience, but usually not. I write for other scholars. I'm really not interested in particularly public debates. I think they get in the way of trying to figure out what actually happened. And that's what I'm interested in. And I hope that if scholars can continue to do open, no restrictions research, that eventually this thing will get figured out. But it complicates things when non-scholars get involved and try to tell people what's going on. To go back to one other point raised earlier, which is that at a research university, we should not be trying to do social justice. We should be trying to figure out what the world is, what happened, if it's history. You know, the great bulk of modern universities are in sciences and math and so forth. When people start talking about social justice, what they're really bringing in is their own private political preferences. And everybody's entitled to their private political preferences. But by my books, that's not what universities pay people to do. They pay people to figure out what's going on. And you asked, you know, what's going to happen here. I hope that eventually we can all will eventually figure out better what it is that actually went on in the 1930s and 40s. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark. I see Jason has a hand. Go ahead, Jason. Dr. Jason Morgan.
Thank you, Doctor. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I wanted to thank you, Professor Yi, for having this forum. I think you're doing a real service to your students. I wish I had had your class when I was an undergrad in the previous century. I wanted to compliment Professor Kim on her extraordinary talk. I agree with her completely on just about everything she said. I think one of the main points for me from her talk was well, two really, who owns history? That's an excellent point. It seems that much of what's going on in the public debate about the comfort women issue is who owns it. And it would seem that at this point, victimhood is apparently the trump card for owning the comfort women history, but it is extraordinarily complex. And I deeply appreciate her call to take into account the structural and the social history that goes into the comfort women history. I think it's very important. And the past is a different country, and its history is more than just moral rhetoric. I deeply appreciate her points. I have a question for you, Professor Yee, on your theoretical grounding about John Stuart Mill. I wonder, and maybe I'm completely misunderstanding you, but it seems that there's a tension between the 2 points that you raised. One is that from a Millian perspective, there should be ongoing dialogue to come to a deeper understanding of points. I completely agree with you on that point. About the state level reconciliation efforts, I wonder if there's not a bit of a leap from the Millian perspective to the state level perspective. In other words, could we not also say that state A and state B could just agree to disagree on history and go forward from there? Is it necessary to come to a shared understanding, or can we have a Millian international historical perspective?
Oh, I see. So
is it necessary to agree in
right.
order to move forward, or can we just say, well, we disagree and we'll keep talking at the state level?
Right. Well, from a Millian perspective, instead of censorship, you have like public disapproval. So if we have that from the international community, maybe that would mean, like, for example, like if you don't like what North Korea is doing, instead of sanctioning North Korea, we should just, you know, like express our public disapproval, right? And that's actually, and so maybe that might be 1 million interpretation. The second thing you mentioned is maybe just agree to disagree about history and just move on. I'm not sure, because I think for democracies that's much harder to do, especially in democracies where like history is very important. So I think for countries like, you know, Turkey and Armenia, or, you know, Israel and Germany, or, you know, Korea, Japan, North Korea, China, you know, basically all of East Asia. You know, I think that, you know, at least right now we are socialized into, as public schools, we're socialized into thinking that history is very important. And when people have divergent histories, that leads to this kind of tension and conflict between different countries. And so I think right now we're at a point where it's very hard to say, like, let's just agree to disagree. And so it feels like just like any agreement between Korea and Japan, like whether 2015 or the 2023 forced labor agreement between Korea and Japan, that all these agreements seem very like tentative. Right. That, you know, there's always this fear that if the next government, the next progressive government can just, you know, like 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, right? That they can just overturn it again. And so that's why I think that things like this kind of dialogue, you know, with young people, with Korean students is very important. And I'm hoping that maybe we can have more of these dialogues with students from China, Japan, Korea, and hopefully North Korea. And so don't forget, Jason, you know what Max Weber said, right? Politics is a hard boring of bores, okay? So we got to work on this, you know, one student at a time to promote this kind of, you know, dialogue, understanding, and reconciliation.
Thank you, Professor Yee. The reason I ask is precisely because of what Professor Kim said, that history is very complicated. And I just wonder if politics is capable of getting down to that fine grain in order to process it and come to an understanding. But
right. I actually had a discussion with this with Korea Peace Now, which is a very strong, you know, kind of a progressive peace organization. And the example was the Nogon-ri incident. Okay. And so this was a US massacre of South Korean civilians during the Korean War. And initially, at first, this topic was taboo. You cannot talk about it. And then in the 1980s, we could finally talk about it, and there was this real polarization, right? But now by 2023, there's enough of a consensus, not a 100% consensus, but there's enough consensus for the major left-wing party to move on. Do you see? And so Bill Clinton, he apologized for the Nogan incident. And so at least for the major, not all leftists, they don't accept his apology, but the major leftist party says the apology is sufficient. And so now we can move on. Okay. So I think what we need is we need enough shared facts, enough shared consensus for at least the major left party, progressive party, the Minjudang party, to say, okay, I can agree and we can move on. Does that make sense, Jason?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, Joseph.
Okay. So hopefully Nogan Ri can be a good template for future conversations. So let's see what happens. Okay. All right. Is there anything else? If not, my students are hungry. They want to finish class. Okay.
I'm sorry.
I will just
oh yes, Marie, you have the last word.
Yeah, just the last word. Yeah. Well, it is just my observation now for the last hour or so. It seems like the academic debate often presumes that one has to start with the correct ideas in order to reach the right conclusion. And I don't think that's the right way of doing history. I think that for the historians, it is important to resist the impulse to judge the past. Rather, I think it's more important to describe and explain what happened as much as we can. And for issues like comfort women issue, I mean, we all, I think, can agree that for issues like this, we then wonder, well, what would be then the satisfactory conclusion, satisfactory resolution, if you will? Korea and Japan can fight forever? Or what would be really the ideal or satisfactory resolution to this? So if you keep that in mind, then then I don't think that this distance between, say, one party and the other party, there's the two different opinions, the distance is not that great once you admit that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I encourage every one of you to contact the speakers today and the audience members, including Julie Tang. So I want you to learn everything you can about this important issue and to share your opinion, share your views and your findings, either through mainstream media and social media. I want more people to get engaged, thoughtfully, not less. Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for participating. Mark and Marie, if this sounds okay, if you like the discussion today, can we post it on YouTube? Is that fine? For the spirit of open dialogue. Or you want
me? Go ahead.
Okay, Marie, that sounds fine. Okay.
I don't have objection.
That sounds fine. I'll give you a few hours to change your mind. You can email me if you change your mind. Okay. Okay. I'd like to thank. Again, I'd like to thank everybody, and then thank you. Let's give applause to each of our audience members and speakers for participating. Okay, this is our last Heterodox Academy Forum for the semester. Have a great summer. I see you guys next in the fall. Thank you. Keep in touch.